All right, welcome to the deep dive. So, you guys sent us this guide, 12 Simple Steps to Get Huge and Shredded
Yeah.
by Chauncey LeBrun,
Yeah.
and it's copyright 2002.
Oh, wow.
So it's a little bit of a throwback, but we're on a mission to kind of, cut through the years and really pull out the core insights that we think can still be incredibly effective for making some serious progress in your fitness.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. There's so much information out there. It can be really overwhelming,
Totally.
and it's hard to know what to focus on. And this book, I think it has some timeless principles in it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we want to do today is really distill it down to those key principles. And, we're not going to get bogged down in the, 80s, bodybuilding culture. We're going to really try to pull out the stuff that can help you understand, like, the why behind certain things you might be doing in the gym or, with your diet, and really help you apply that to your own journey.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, this book definitely, it has some things in it that might be a little dated, let's say.
Right.
But the underlying principles, I think, are still very much relevant.
Yeah, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So right off the bat, a couple of things that jumped out at me when I was reading through this. One, LeBron is a big proponent of like quality over quantity in your workouts. He even suggests that like doing more sets and reps is not necessarily better and could actually be detrimental to your progress. So let's just jump right into that. What's the thinking there?
Well, he's really focused on creating a signal, a powerful signal for your body to change, rather than just doing more work. I mean, it's kind of like, if you think about it, a few really focused heavy lifts,
Right.
that sends a powerful message to your muscles. Like, hey, we need to get stronger.
Right.
Whereas if you're just doing a ton of reps with lighter weight, it might not send that same signal.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Another thing he clarifies early on that I found interesting is this whole concept of toning up. We hear that all the time. And he says it's not a different type of training. It's really about losing body fat to reveal the muscle you already have and maybe, building some additional lean muscle tissue. But, it's not about just doing these, super high rep, lightweight exercises. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a really helpful way to look at it, because there's this common misconception that, if you want to tone up, you need to do these special exercises or you need to do super high reps. But what he's basically saying is, if you want to look leaner and more defined, the key is to build muscle through resistance training.
Right.
And then shed excess fat through, your diet and cardio.
Got it.
It's not so much about the specific rep range you're using. It's more about the overall approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole guide kind of has this theme of keeping things simple and efficient, and it's almost positioned as like, forget all these, overwhelming and sometimes bogus, fitness products that are out there.
Yeah, I see that.
It's really about getting back to the basics.
I think that's one of the strengths of this book, because the fitness industry can be so noisy.
Totally.
They're trying to sell you the next best thing all the time.
Absolutely.
And I think he's kind of cutting through that noise and saying, you know what, let's just focus on the fundamentals.
Right.
Let's focus on the training principles. Let's focus on smart nutrition. And that's really what's going to get your results in the long run.
All right, so let's get into the weekly breakdown here. So week 1, the importance of goals. And it seems like an obvious thing.
Right.
But he really gets into the why of why goals are so important. He says that, every action has a reason, and your fitness journey is no different, whether you want to look better, feel better, get healthier, stronger, have more energy, all these different things. So, I mean, what's the first step then, if that's the case?
Well, I think it's really important to figure out what your main driving force is. He emphasizes that the first step isn't hitting the gym.
Right.
It's figuring out why you want to change. What's that deep-seated motivation that's going to keep you going when things get tough?
Yeah, he even suggests, like, making a list of all the good things that will happen when you reach your goals and really picturing yourself enjoying those benefits. It's really about tapping into that internal motivation. He also uses this analogy of, driving from Maine to Florida without a map.
Oh, wow.
You might be willing to drive, you might be willing to work hard, but if you don't know where you're going, you're just going to be wandering aimlessly.
That's a great analogy. And I think that's so true for fitness. You can put in all this time and effort at the gym with your diet, but if you don't have a clear destination in mind, it's hard to stay motivated.
Absolutely.
And it's hard to know if you're even heading in the right direction.
Totally. So for week 1, his task for you is to, figure out your top 3 fitness goals And then more importantly, the why behind each one of them.
Okay.
And then from that, kind of distill it down even further and figure out, like, what is your single most important goal? And what is that deep, deep reason, that's driving you?
Yeah, I think that process of prioritizing is key
Right.
because, if you just have this laundry list of things you want to achieve, it can be really overwhelming. But if you can focus on what matters most and really connect that to a strong emotional reason, that's going to give you an anchor. It's
Yeah.
going to help you stay committed when those obstacles pop up, because they will.
Totally. He even defines, like, what is a goal? He's like, it's something you're willing to achieve at all costs. It's a desire for what you don't have. It's the destination before the journey. He says without it, you're going nowhere.
And I think that really highlights the level of commitment that a real goal requires. It's not just a casual wish. It's a firm decision.
Right.
It's something that you're backed, that you back up, with a willingness to work through whatever comes your way.
And that's really what separates, just, dreaming about something
Yeah.
and actually taking, specific action to achieve it. So then he goes on to talk about, knowing where you are, knowing where you want to end up, knowing the steps to get there, and setting realistic and achievable goals, which makes perfect sense because you don't want to set yourself up for, disappointment right from the start.
Exactly. Setting unrealistic goals can be really discouraging, and it can actually lead to people giving up before they even really get started.
Right, right.
Whereas if you set achievable goals, as you hit those goals, you get that sense of accomplishment. And that fuels your motivation. It keeps you moving forward.
I love this point that he makes about the power of writing down your goals. He says it makes them tangible, it makes them real. If they're just thoughts in your head, they're just dreams. They're not actual goals. So he's a big proponent of actually writing them down, making them specific, giving them deadlines.
Yeah, I think that's a really simple but incredibly effective technique,
Yeah.
because it takes it from just this vague idea to an actual commitment. When you write something down, it becomes more real. And when you add those specifics and deadlines, it creates a sense of urgency. And it also allows you to track your progress objectively.
Absolutely. So he says, like, okay, I want to lose a pound of fat a week, or I want to increase my bench press by, 20 pounds in a month, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Those types of specific goals.
Yeah, having those measurable objectives makes a huge difference.
Totally. And finally, for week 1, he wraps up by saying that goals are essential for measuring your success. So, if you don't know what you're aiming for, how will you know if you've actually, accomplished something? It's like having a built-in, way to see if you're on the right track or not.
Right. Goals give you that benchmark to compare your efforts and results against.
Right.
So you can see what's working, you can make adjustments when you need to, and you can stay focused on that desired outcome.
All right, moving on to week 2, the basics of weight training. He lays out some, what he considers fundamental principles for effective resistance training. So the first one is the target rep range, and he recommends progressing to 4 to 6 reps per set on most exercises for maximum muscle stimulation. And I think, that's a pretty, low number of reps compared to what, maybe some people recommend. So what's the reasoning there?
The key here is that when you're lifting in that 4 to 6 rep range, you're typically using a heavier weight. And that heavier weight is what leads to greater activation of your muscle fibers.
Gotcha.
Which is a major driver for strength and muscle growth. It's like you're telling your body, hey, we need to develop some raw power here.
Gotcha. So then he goes on to talk about the number of heavy sets. And he's saying just 1 or 2 sets per exercise, depending on where it falls in your routine. Again, that quality over quantity kind of shining through here.
Yeah, the idea is that if you're really pushing yourself hard enough, 1 or 2 really intense sets close to failure can provide a sufficient stimulus for your muscles to grow. And doing more sets might just lead to fatigue without necessarily giving you a lot of extra benefit.
Gotcha. Workout duration, he says, keep it under 45 minutes, ideally around 30 minutes to maintain intensity and, keep your hormones, in that kind of optimal state for muscle building. So that's good news, if you're pressed for time.
Right. I mean, that's a really encouraging message, I think, for a lot of people, because we often think that we need to spend hours in the gym to get results. But what he's saying is, if you can keep it short and focused,
Right.
you can actually get more out of your workouts. And the reason for that is that, longer workouts can lead to a drop in intensity, and they can also lead to a less favorable hormonal environment.
Gotcha, gotcha. So rest between sets, he says at least 1 minute between warm-up sets and at least 2 minutes between those heavy, challenging sets. So again, it seems that he's really prioritizing letting your muscles recover enough so you can keep lifting heavy.
That's exactly it. Adequate rest allows your muscles to replenish their energy stores,
Right.
so you can maintain that high level of intensity that's needed for progressive overload, which we'll get to soon. But it's basically making sure that you're strong enough to really challenge yourself on each subsequent set.
Gotcha. Training frequency for each muscle group, he says, just once every 7 days. I mean, that seems like a lot of downtime for each muscle.
Right, but this is a principle that really emphasizes the importance of giving your muscles enough time to repair and rebuild
Okay.
after intense training. Because he's saying that if you train them again too soon, you can actually interfere with that recovery process, and you can actually lead to overtraining.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, this is interesting. He recommends taking a break after every 2 months of training.
Oh, wow.
So at least 5, ideally 7 consecutive days off from any workouts or strenuous activity.
A whole week.
Yeah.
That's pretty significant.
So what's the thought behind that?
I think the idea there is that, consistent training puts a lot of stress on your system.
Right.
And so giving your body a chance to fully recover, to rejuvenate your muscles, your joints, even your nervous system, can actually help you prevent plateaus and burnout down the road.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And finally, for week 2, he kind of circles back to this importance of simplicity, efficiency, and effectiveness, in designing your workouts and highlighting, basic exercises like the bench press and squats as being incredibly effective. It's like, don't get caught up in doing too many, fancy movements.
Exactly. He's really a champion for, focusing on those foundational compound exercises, the ones that work multiple muscle groups at once.
Yeah.
They allow you to lift the most weight overall, and they've really proven their worth for building strength and muscle.
All right, week 3 moves into what he considered the cornerstone of muscle growth, progressive overload.
Yeah.
And he states very clearly that the only reason your muscles get bigger and stronger is by consistently increasing the overload, essentially, making them do more work over time. So, I mean, why is this so important?
This is probably the single most important principle for long-term muscle growth, because your body is incredibly adaptable. So if you keep doing the same thing over and over again,
Right.
your muscles have no real reason to change. So progressive overload is how you force that change.
Gotcha. So he explains that your muscles adapt to the stress of weight training. And so to keep seeing progress, you have to continually challenge them by increasing the resistance. And that usually means lifting heavier weights.
Exactly. Progressive overload is the mechanism that drives adaptation. It's the signal to your body that its current strength level isn't enough. So we need to build more muscle tissue to handle that load.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay. He points out that using lower reps allows for those immediate increases in overload, which then stimulates new muscle fibers. So that makes sense. Like you can usually lift more weight when you're only doing a few reps.
Right. And so by focusing on that 4 to 6 rep range, you're typically using a weight that's heavy enough to recruit more of your muscle fibers, including those that have the greatest potential for growth. It's kind of like you're activating more of your muscle's potential.
Gotcha. Okay, and this is key. He says you absolutely must keep a written log of your workouts to track your weights and take the guesswork out of it.
Absolutely. I think that's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
If you really want to effectively implement progressive overload, because it gives you that objective data, are you consistently increasing the weight, the reps, the sets you're doing over time,
Right.
rather than just relying on how you feel on a particular day.
Totally, totally. He gives a guideline for when to increase the weight, and he says when you can do more than 6 reps with good form. And the increase itself can be small. It could just be a pound or 2 for smaller exercises or up to 5 pounds for bigger movements. It's all about just that consistent, gradual progress.
Right, and I think that's a good way to know when to push yourself. You don't want to jump up too much in weight, because that could compromise your form.
Right.
It could increase your risk of injury. Small, steady increases are the key to sustainable progress.
Right. And he comes back to that idea of efficiency, saying that 4 to 6 intense reps are more effective for muscle growth than doing, say, 10 lighter reps. Again, it's that stimulus argument, quality over quantity.
Yeah, it reinforces that the intensity and the effort you put into each rep is really what matters most. It's not just about accumulating a high volume of lighter work. It's those heavy, challenging reps that really trigger your muscles to adapt and grow stronger.
Okay, so he talks a little bit about warming up. He's like, do just enough to, get the blood flowing without tiring out your muscles before those heavy sets, a light set of 10 reps. And he warns against warming up to failure. So, save your energy for the stuff that really matters.
Yeah, a warm-up should be effective, but minimal. The goal is to increase blood flow, increase muscle temperature, which can improve your performance and help prevent injuries. But you don't want to use up all your energy before you get to the real work.
Okay. He's a big proponent of doing a maximum of 2 all-out sets for each exercise. Again, quality over quantity.
Right.
It's the overload that signals growth, not just the total number of sets you grind through. I love this phrase. Stimulate, not annihilate the muscle.
I love that phrase. It perfectly sums up the goal. You want to provide enough of a challenge to trigger your body to adapt, but you don't want to overdo it.
Right. You want to kind of, push it to the edge.
Exactly.
But not go over. So he gives an example for the flat bench press. Start with a light warm-up set of 10, then maybe a little bit heavier set of 6, maybe even a heavier set of 3, and then finally, there's 2 heavy sets of 4 to 6 reps where you're pushing to failure, and then you're done with that exercise. It's a very focused approach.
Yeah, and I think that illustrates this principle of gradually preparing your muscles for those maximal effort sets. So by the time you get to those heavy working sets, your muscles are primed and ready to be challenged to their limit.
Right. And he says, weight training isn't an endurance activity. Spending twice as long in the gym doesn't automatically mean you get twice the results.
Right.
He even mentions that the release of testosterone, which is, one of the key hormones for muscle growth, tends to decrease after about 30 minutes of intense exercise.
That's an interesting point about the hormonal aspect of training because, prolonged intense exercise can actually lead to an increase in those stress hormones like cortisol.
Right.
Which can actually work against your muscle building efforts.
Gotcha. So it's like finding that sweet spot.
Exactly.
Enough to stimulate, not enough to
put your body into that catabolic state.
Yeah, right. The importance of getting enough rest. He warns that training muscles that are still sore is counterproductive. So that, again, that once-a-week training frequency per muscle group is mentioned again as allowing enough time for your muscle to really recover so they can, be ready to handle that progressive overload in your next workout.
Yeah, training while your muscles are sore is an indication that they haven't fully repaired and rebuilt. And so that can compromise your performance, increase your risk of injury.
Right.
And ultimately slow down your progress. So adequate rest is essential for that repair and adaptation to occur.
Totally. I like this analogy he uses about stress. He's like, continuous unpredictable stress is bad for you.
Yeah.
And proper rest is crucial to avoid the negative effects of, long-term weight training. So it's all about kind of managing that stress that you're putting on your body.
Right. It's a good comparison because weight training is a form of controlled stress.
Right.
But just like with any stressor, your body needs those periods of rest and recovery to adapt and avoid those negative consequences.
Right. So then he shares this story about Brian's story, I think it's called.
Okay.
And it's very relatable.
Yeah.
This guy, Brian, initially saw great results with simple exercises, infrequent, intense workouts. But then as he kind of learned more and started doing more exercises and spending more time in the gym, he plateaued and even went backwards. And it wasn't until he went back to that simple, efficient approach that he really started making progress again. So it's a very powerful, real world example of kind of what he's talking about.
Yeah, Brian's experience really illustrates that core message of, focus on the fundamentals and avoid the trap of thinking that more is always better.
Right.
His initial success came from consistently applying progressive overload to those basic exercises. And his plateau happened when he strayed from those effective strategies.
Week 4 is all about identifying training problems. And he says that if you're not seeing the results you want in terms of fat loss or muscle gain, the problem likely lies in one of 3 key areas: your weight training program, your cardio routine, or your eating habits.
Right, so he's giving you a framework
Yeah,
to figure out what might be holding you back.
totally. So he kind of goes into how to structure your weight training for efficiency and effectiveness. It's kind of a summary and expansion of what he talked about in weeks 2 and 3. So he says, start with a 5-minute cardio warm-up before you lift weights, emphasizing, don't start with cold muscles.
Right, so the purpose of that short cardio warm-up is to get your blood flying, raise your core temperature,
Right.
just prepare your muscles for the more intense work that's coming.
Gotcha, gotta. And then your first weight exercise should begin with a very light set of 10 reps as a warm-up for those specific muscles. And again, he stresses never warming up to failure. Save that energy for the heavy stuff.
Yeah, so these lighter warm-up sets are further preparing the specific muscles that you're going to be working,
Right,
allowing you to gradually increase the weight, get a feel for the movement pattern
right.
before you start doing those heavy sets.
Gotcha. The next set or two, he says, should be progressively heavier, with the goal of reaching failure in that 4 to 6 rep range. And, for really demanding exercises like squats, he even suggests maybe a set of just 3 reps before you go for those heavy sets. So again, it's all about kind of, ramping up that intensity gradually.
Yeah, this structured approach to your warm-up sets is really helping to activate your nervous system and prime your muscles for that maximal effort, which can ultimately lead to better strength output
Gotcha.
during those working sets.
Gotcha. Okay. So then we get to the heavy sets, where you choose a weight that will make you reach failure within that, kind of that critical 4 to 6 rep range.
Yeah.
And this is the key, he says, to stimulating significant muscle growth.
These are the sets that are providing the main stimulus for your muscles to get bigger and stronger.
Right.
Pushing yourself to near failure in that rep range is really maximizing the recruitment of your muscle fibers.
Gotcha. He reiterates workouts should stay under 45 minutes, ideally closer to 30,
Right.
to, help you stay focused and maintain a high level of intensity.
Right. Keeping the workout duration shorter helps to keep your intensity levels high throughout the session. And it can also be beneficial for managing fatigue and optimizing your hormonal responses.
Gotcha. Reminders about the rest periods. 1 minute between warm-up sets, 2 minutes between the heavy sets.
Right. And those rest periods are really strategically timed to allow your muscles to recover enough so you can maintain your strength and intensity.
Right. He recommends training just 1 or 2 muscle groups in each workout to help you focus and maintain intensity.
Yeah.
And kind of warning against, trying to work too many muscle groups in one session because you'll likely end up, kind of cheating on those later exercises.
Right. I mean, by focusing on a smaller number of muscle groups, you can direct more of your energy and attention to each one,
Yeah,
potentially leading to a greater overall training effect.
that makes a lot of sense. The once every 5 to 7 days training frequency per muscle group is mentioned again to allow for full recovery so you can really handle that progressive overload in your next workout.
Right. And he reminds us that your muscles actually build themselves during those rest periods, not while you're training.
Right.
So the time between your workouts is when those damaged muscle fibers repair and rebuild,
Yeah,
which is what leads to increased strength and size.
that's a good reminder. He says, listen to your body.
Right.
If a muscle's still really sore after a full week, give it more time to recover. Training a muscle that's still sore can actually hinder your progress.
Yeah, paying attention to your body's signals is so important for avoiding overtraining and injury. So if a muscle is still significantly sore, it's a sign that it hasn't fully recovered,
Right.
and it needs a little more rest.
Yeah. And finally, for this section, he recommends taking a full week off from training after every 8 weeks of consistent hard work
Yeah.
to allow for both physical and mental recovery. It's kind of like hitting a reset button.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And that planned deload period allows your body to recover from the cumulative stress of intense training. And it can also help prevent that mental burnout, which can ultimately lead to better progress in the long run.
Okay, week 5 is titled Instantly Add Weight to All Your Lifts, which
Sounds good?
sounds pretty appealing.
Yeah.
So he says, step 1, the proper 5-minute cardio warm-up before you even touch the weights to get your blood flowing and your energy up.
So we're back to that initial warm-up, getting that cardiovascular system going, increasing blood flow to your muscles, prepping them for the more demanding work ahead.
Gotcha. Okay, so then he talks about doing warm-up sets with the actual weights that you'll be lifting. So, start light, 10 reps or so, gradually increase the weight while lowering the reps, maybe to 6, then to 3, before you get to your heavy working sets. And again, the goal here is to, just get your muscles ready, not to tire them out.
Right, so this is like a specific weight warm-up
Okay.
to activate the muscles you're about to target.
Yeah, yeah.
You're practicing the movement pattern with increasing resistance before you attempt your maximum effort sets.
Okay, cool. He really emphasizes being efficient, getting rid of wasted reps and sets. Train smarter, not just harder.
Right, and by not overdoing it on your warm-up sets, you're conserving your strength and energy for those main working sets, allowing you to lift more weight and achieve a greater training stimulus.
Yeah, so save it for when it counts. He warns against getting prematurely fatigued from doing too much volume in your warm-ups. Again, save your power for those crucial heavy lifts.
Exactly. Warm up sufficiently, but minimally.
Right.
You want your muscles and your nervous system to be ready to perform at their peak. You don't want to be tired from excessive pre-work.
Okay, this is interesting. He says, there's this principle of you don't need to re-warm up a muscle that's already warm during your workout.
Yeah, yeah.
So, if you're moving from, say, like a flat bench press to an incline press, you don't need to start super light again. He says, instead, do just 1 or 2 kind of acclimation sets of, 6 to 8 reps
Right.
before you jump into your heavy sets. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like you've already kind of, got those chest muscles activated.
Right. It's a more efficient way to move through your workout because your muscles will still have some activation from the previous exercise.
Right.
So you just need that little bit of a reminder before you really challenge them with the heavier weight.
Okay, cool. And this is something I think a lot of people do. He advises against pyramiding.
Yeah.
Which is, you increase the weight for a set and then you decrease it for the subsequent sets with higher reps. And he's like, if progressive overload is the key to growth, why would you go backwards? It's a waste of energy and training time.
Yeah, I mean, his logic there is sound. If your primary goal is to overload your muscles,
Right.
then reducing the weight after reaching your heaviest point isn't really contributing to that goal. It's basically doing less work when you still have the energy to push harder.
So focus on, what's going to move the needle.
Exactly.
Not, kind of spinning your wheels.
Yeah.
He points out that, you should expect to start feeling results like increased strength before you actually see significant changes in your physique.
Right.
And that the new soreness you might experience is normal because, you're recruiting muscle fibers you haven't used before, causing those, tiny tears that need to repair. And it's that repair process that, leads to stronger, bigger muscles.
Right. I think that's an important point about managing expectations. Strength gains often precede those noticeable changes in muscle size. And that post-workout soreness is a natural byproduct. It's your muscles adapting
All right.
to the new demands that you're placing on them.
Week 6 turns up the intensity. The reason behind success.
Okay.
He defines intensity as an